Hello, my dear gardeners. How to successfully keep our roses healthy and happy through the winter in pots, in containers. This is the topic of today's video. Also, we are going to talk about tree roses or standard roses, how to bring them through the winter successfully too. Olga, Carmody with you here today. Let's begin. Alright, so you grow roses in containers and you grow roses in cold climates. So here comes the problem of trying to overwinter them and keep them alive through the winter. The gardener has three options. First option would be to bury the pot in the garden, forget about that rose for the whole winter, and just come back to bring it up to the surface next spring. I would say this would be the least maintenance involved situation. If you don't have that opportunity, you can move to scenario number 2. You can move your pots into the sheltered location somewhere inside your house. And there are a lot of interesting rules around there, not to break the dormancy of that rose, so we will talk about that too. And if you don't have that possibility, you can try to overwinter your roses outside. So let's begin with the first one. If you have a space somewhere in the garden, you can just dig a hole. There is nothing scientific about it. You dig a hole, you put your rose pot in to the brims, you make the soil tight around the pot, you cover it with your favorite mulch, and your rose is good to go. Your rose root system would be there, nicely tucked into the ground, and will overwinter as any other plant in your garden. You don't need to pay attention to your rose. Rose will have plenty of moisture, plenty of coldness to keep its dormancy. So basically you plant and forget. But there are disadvantages of this way of overwintering roses. First, God bless your back, because if you have heavy pots, it's tough to dig that ground and then take that pot out of the soil. It can be difficult in spring, and clean up of the bucket and all that stuff. If you don't have that option, you don't have space in the garden, or if you have the space in the garden, why not to plant that rose to begin with instead of keeping it in the pot? If you don't have that option and you still want to grow your roses in containers and keep them at the patio, rotate them to their best viewing position, you have option number 2 of moving roses inside the house, inside of unheated area. And the most important thing, the most important word here is unheated area. Why is it? Because we don't want roses to break dormancy. Remember, as I said in my first video right here, we want roses to go into dormancy and stay in dormant stage through all the winter. Because if rose breaks dormancy, it's too warm in our garage, then it starts growing, and then you don't have light, you don't have space, you can't bring rose outside, and rose already woke up and wants to grow. And as a result, that plant can suffer because there is another month to go of winter, and you already have a growing rose in your shady garage, let's say. So there was a question from the viewer who wanted to bring their roses into their unheated pool. And the area in which to bring the rose would be around 40 degrees, so borderline freezing, but not freezing, 40, 35, something like that, shady conditions. And when to do it is the time when rose is already in dormant stage, and usually it happens after several quick freezes in the area. So we are talking about an hour, 2 hours of temperature dropping below freezing conditions. That amount of freezing conditions are not going to damage rose in the pot, because pot wouldn't have enough time to get so cold. And that would be the window when to start prepping rose and moving it into the sheltered location before heavy colds hit your area. And I mean the whole night of 28 degrees. That would be already damaging to pots. So you want to wait the time of first freezes, when rose goes into dormant stage, but before those very severe cold nights when temperature stays cold for a long time, for 6-8 hours, because that time is enough for the pot to get very cold, and as a result, the roots of the plant might suffer. So what happens? What do you have to do with that pot? Once freezes come, you make sure you defoliate all the leaves, you deadhead the rose, you trim it. Some gardeners like to spray it. It's up to you what you want to do. I garden organically, so I might use neem oil. So you defoliate it, you make sure that you have this space in the pot when you plant the rose of empty space. This way you can put mulch on top. You water your rose, not too much, and you move it into sheltered location. Location has to be not sunny, semi-shade, not very hot, not very cold, so no freezing and no 50 degrees. And if you have cold floor, like my garage, unheated garage, the floor is cement. You would try to put your pots on some sort of bricks or some sort of support for those pots not to sit directly on cement, because cement can get very cold and that coldness can come into the pot and touch the roots of the rose. And then you do have to watch your rose during winter. During the first when you do the bearing of the rose in the garden, weather would be doing everything for you, so you don't need to watch those roses. But when you have roses inside the garage, you want to make sure that your roses do stay hydrated. You don't want to water too much, and you don't want to make that pot dry, because in winter, rose still is using energy to keep itself alive, and it does need to keep its stems hydrated. I understand the processes in rose tissues are slowing down drastically during the dormant period, but still they are still going. And rose does need moisture from soil to keep stems going. And the golden rule is approximately 1 gallon of water for 2 weeks to keep that rose hydrated. And you want to keep the soil not super wet, but still there should be some amount of hydration in that soil. Also, you have to make sure that direct sun, is not touching those pots. And then when spring comes, roses start breaking dormancy. You make sure that there are no freezing conditions anymore. And then you bring your rose out and you introduce it to the elements again. Again, when the weather is not freezing for long times. So that's how to overwinter roses inside the sheltered area. How about if you don't have strength to bring those huge rose containers into the garage? You have another option, overwintering it outside. The golden rule of overwintering all the roses outside would be, you have to buy roses which are at least 2 zones colder than yours to have a chance of successful overwintering them outside in pots out of soil level, right? So if I live in zone 6, 7, at least my roses in pots should be in zone 5. And I don't grow roses in containers because I don't want to sit and think if my rose will live through the winter and if I'm going to lose that rose or not. I do get attached to my plants, you know. They're my little friends in the garden. So I feel bad when I lose a plant, but that's just me, you know. I'm sure some gardeners feel like me too. So 2 zones, at least 2 zones colder. And then you have a chance to overwinter them successfully. But even then, the conditions might be so unpredictable, our climate change, that we can have this very strange 2 days of freezing temperatures, really not characteristic to your area, and you might still lose that rose in the pot. So, advice, don't grow your heritage granny's favorite rose in the pot outside, because you might still lose it. Even if you do everything right, there are chances that roses will not survive. So how to do that? Usually when you know that you have this rose in pots in winter, when you plant the rose and you have bud union there, you plant it deep, at least 6 inches under the soil level. And when you fill the pot with soil, you leave this amount of space between soil level and the brims of the pot, because in winter you want to fill that space with mulch or whatever your favorite ground cover you have. This way that mulch will help the soil not to evaporate moisture and protect rose. sheltered condition generally. You don't want those pots to sit in windy, exposed open areas. So you find a place which is very well protected around your garden, and you put all the pots in one group together. Smaller pots in the middle, bigger pots outside, because smaller pots do have less chances to survive over winter. And then you use black plastic, not to cover the whole rose grouping, only the pots. Tuck it nicely all around the pots, that black plastic. And why is black plastic? Well, plastic is generally good to protect against wind, and wind, desiccating wind, is bad for plants because in winter it takes away moisture, and plant doesn't have moisture from the soil because soil is frozen to replenish that moisture in the stems. So stems are drying out on that wind. So actually the biggest enemy of the plant in winter is not cold, but wind, which takes away moisture from stems. So that's plastic, right? Black plastic. And why black? Because black attracts sun rays, and we do need to keep our roses a little bit warmer if we can. And this is totally out of the topic. And if you're growing roses on balconies in hot areas, the advice is to keep roses in light containers, because light containers reflect sun. Light containers don't absorb sun, and roses don't bake, basically. They stay cooler a little bit because of that light color. But in winter, we do want roses to be at least teeny tiny warmer, so we use that black, and we use plastic for the wind. Again, we don't cover the whole thing with plastic. We want rose to be able to breathe. We don't want mold to move in. So we just tuck nicely all the area around the pots. And if we want to protect roses from wind, we can cover the top of roses with burlap fabric, porous fabric, because we want our roses to be able to breathe. That's very important. One more thing I want to say, that you don't want those pots to sit on the ground. You want to put some sort of bricks under them or wood, because soil is cold. So you want to give those roses a little bit of extra protection. There was a question from the viewer who said, we live in Southeast Oregon in a very cold climate, where we have early hard freezes. I have two new generous gardener, I believe. We have two generous gardeners this year that were in pots. Then I got scared with the predicted freeze, and we planted them in the ground quick. Now what? Well, Oregon, I checked on the internet, and the variations of planting zones can be huge, from 6, 7, 8 to 5. So let's assume the viewer is in zone 5, and she just planted those roses into the ground. Well, the good news is that the viewer can do really good winter protection and give those roses best chance to overwintering. The bad news is that the viewer planted them a little bit too late, too close to the winter in zone 5. But again, the best thing right now in this situation, whatever is done is done. Make sure that you really hill up the soil around those plants. I would put a cage, chicken wire cage around, fill it up with leaves. I would spray the anti-desiccant spray, anti-wilt, right? I still can't remember the name of that product. I will put it on the screen. And let your rose go into dormancy. And hopefully in your generous garden, it would be good to go. Generous garden is hardy to zone 5, and you do live in zone 5. So I would recommend winter protection from now on every year for your generous garden. My generous garden is very hardy. I never have any problems here. But again, I'm zone 6, 7, and this area is very sheltered near the back of our garden. All right, so this is it about potted roses. Let me know if I missed something, and I will try to answer those questions under this video. We are moving to topic number 2, tree roses or standards. And very often we do have those standard roses in the garden centers, and people don't buy them because they don't know how to take care after them. So let's go through the anatomy of a standard rose. We do have graft unions there. that graft union is not at the bottom of the plant, it is at the top. So what we have? We have root system, we have a plant trunk growing, and on that trunk we have bud union where different rows is grafted. So that bud union is, again, the weakest part in the rose. And because that rose bud union is so high over the ground, we need to protect it. And if we want to grow those beautiful tree roses in cold climates, protection is sometimes horrendous. And there are two ways to do it. You either have to grow your rose in the pot, big pot, because, you know, tree rose is fairly big plant, and you have to move it into the unheated garage or unheated space, and then take it out in spring again. Or what some gardeners do, and I'm not sure how many people do that, if you grow your tree rose in the ground, in the middle of the fall, you have to savage, you have to cut half of the roots of the rose, dig a trench on another side, lower the whole rose into the trench. Oh my gosh, what butchery, right? And then hill it all up and cover the whole thing with soil. I don't know how many gardeners do it on a regular basis, and how rose is liking it, I don't know. Half of the roots to be cut off. But that's another way to overwinter standard rose in the garden. If you want to overwinter outside and your rose is growing in the open field in soil, and your climate is not suited to overwinter that rose successfully. I remember my relatives in Ukraine bought this beautiful standard rose, and they were enjoying it the whole summer because if standard rose is grown correctly, it's a beautiful sight to have all those trailing blooms on a long stem. Gorgeous thing, right? And then they said next year that rose changed color and it became all red. It was pink. And I was trying to explain to them that this is what happened. Basically, you left it outside, the bud union died, the whole thing died on top, and then this root system with the stem, which is hardy in your area, just took over, and you got yourself a red rose, which I guess is not a bad thing. You didn't lose the whole plant, but still it's bad because you want to enjoy those pink blooms. Another thing about growing tree roses would be you do have to support that stem. And usually we buy roses with very thin stems. They are very youngish. That stem has a tendency to become thick with age, but there is no way you can grow it without very thick and heavy plank right near that stem. And that makes a little bit of an unsightly view, but I think it's a healthy compromise to have or not to have a standard. All right, my dear gardeners. Again, if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them under this video. And if I miss any topics, please do let me know. And let me know what should be our next topic, if you have any, for winterizing roses. Have a lovely day, and I will see you next time. Happy gardening!